Okay, sorry for that interruption. The other points I wanted to make about Chapter 10 are that on page 88, there's a number of scenarios for different practice areas. And I guess I just want to comment on the very top one on the left-hand column. David, the 7-year-old in the school system who's having trouble with handwriting. This kind of perpetuates a stereotype of OT in the schools in which all they do is work on handwriting, and that's far from the truth. Handwriting would be possibly, difficulties in handwriting would be a symptom of some other larger body image problems, possibly, also fine motor control, also strength, and type of grasp or prehension. But never would an OT in the school see a child for only handwriting and be the only person working with that child. Kids in special ed have individualized educational plans, IEPs. Many of you know about those. And it involves a team working with a child with various aspects of their difficulties with education. So I don't want you to think that an OT's role in the schools is just handwriting. A little bit further down that same page, it talks about Kylie, who had a traumatic brain injury, and they're working with getting her back to work. While OTs do work in this area, someone with a traumatic brain injury would have gone through intensive inpatient rehab first, working on impulse control, transfers, self-care items like dressing, hygiene, bathing, transfers in and out of all those places in the bathroom. And by the time you would get to getting her back to work, her inpatient stay would be over and OT may not be reimbursed anymore past that point. So this scenario is where we would like to be, but it often comes way down the road. There's also a couple of items on page 90, there's a small amount of text, and I want you to realize they're really talking about activity analysis and adapting activities. Working in the kitchen with this lady is a perfect OT activity, and it really embodies what OT is all about and our uniqueness, and it hinges on good activity analysis and adaptation. Page 92, pay close attention to box 10.1 on occupational profile. That's a really important aspect of OT. And the occupational therapy process in general on that page. They're really talking about occupation as means and end. So working with someone through occupational activities while they're in therapy so they can perform occupations after they're out of therapy. There's a little spot on page 93 on maintaining function, and what they describe really is something you might see as an OT working in hospice, where someone is not going to improve but maintain their function. I don't want you to confuse that with other areas where someone has reached their plateau. OT does not continue to maintain that function. That's not a covered service in terms of hospitalization. That's more the role of a CNA in long-term care or a personal care attendant or even an OTA in certain settings. Finally, a couple of corrections. The bottom of the left-hand column on page 94 talks about consultation as an area of practice, and that is a big area, especially in the school system. I want to correct what it says about the practitioner is not responsible for the outcome of the intervention in consultation. That couldn't be more incorrect. If we're consulting, we're always responsible for the outcome. We're responsible to check back and make sure what our advice led to, whether this advice was good advice and whether the intervention or the approach was the correct approach. Same thing at the top of the right-hand column, same page, under education. It talks about an OT working with a child who's having feeding difficulties and shows up at the house at a time where the child wouldn't normally eat. And so instead of demonstrating on the child, just talks to the mother or the caregiver. Again, this wouldn't happen. If you're going to the home to work on feeding difficulties, you make sure that it is the right time to eat. And you would never just talk in general. You would always demonstrate on the child any positioning or feeding techniques, and then make sure that the caregiver, the mom, the dad, whoever it is able to do what you're talking about. Because once you leave, you rely on them to be able to carry that out. Okay, I think that's it. I'll get back online and give you some high points and low points of Chapter 11 pretty soon.